everybody, welcome to the kitchen. We're working on our orange date scones, and this is our recipe. One of the tricks I have found over the years of making scones, I've made scones for over 20 years now, and every time I make them, I cut them into tiny little cubes, freeze them, add the butter so it's really cold, and cut the butter in. And every time I make them, I keep thinking, what else can I do to make them better? And I was doing some recipe research, and I found a trick that another chef was doing. They were grating the butter on a box grater, and that helped immensely. So here we have our box grater. Here is our butter, and it's really cold. I just put it in the freezer for about an hour before I want to grate it so it doesn't melt. And after I finish grating it, while I'm measuring out all my other ingredients, I'm going to put them back into the freezer so it stays really cold. So again, this is one of those things that, let's see, maybe I can do it with one hand. So I can show you how to do this. Open up the butter. This is unsalted butter. We don't need that extra salt in our life, and I'd rather control the amount of salt that's going into the recipe. So now normally you hold this upright and you grate down the side, okay? But since I'm holding the camera with one hand, I'll try to do it this way. Okay, so now what I'm doing is basically shredding the butter. And this will make it that much easier to incorporate into the dry ingredients. And when we're making scones, we're making what's called cut-in butter method, and that's what makes the end result really flaky. So if you have a good scone, you should be able to just sort of break it in half with your fingers and then add some butter, jam, or clotted cream. And that really is the texture you want when you are making a scone. So let me finish doing that and I'll come back and show you more. So here are our dates, and these are great because these are already chopped. See that? Dates usually are big like this, and then, it takes some time to chop them. So the fact that these are already chopped, that's a real time saver. So this is a great brand, Sunsweet, and we need to measure out 5 ounces. So we're gonna open this up and measure this out. So here they are. Even though they're chopped, there are some really big ones in here. And also they're a bit hard. They got really dried out. So what I'm gonna do is called rehydrating them. I'm gonna put them in a measuring cup, cover it with water, and then put it in the microwave for a couple of minutes, 2 minutes, and then strain it to rehydrate them. And anything that's too big, like this, I'm gonna chop smaller. Okay, we want all small uniform sizes. Okay, so I have our dates. They're in a measuring cup. I filled it with water. I have my strainer ready. I'm gonna put this into the microwave for 2 minutes, and when it's done, I will strain it, and then that will rehydrate our dates. Since they were a bit hard, you don't wanna bake them in a scone, because then that'll just make it even harder. They'll have like little rocks in your scone. And we're gonna set it for 2 minutes. We'll strain it. If it's too wet, we'll blot it dry on some paper towel, and then if those big pieces, I'm gonna cut them into even smaller pieces. All right, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna sift all the dry ingredients for our scones. So I have right here our 3 tablespoons of baking powder. I'm gonna add that right into, this is our sifter. If you look right here, it's a crank action sifter. You put everything in and it goes through. I just got my sleeve in the flour by accident, and I'm gonna scoop this in here as well. And I'm gonna also add the salt, and that will help evenly distribute the salt into our dry ingredients. I'm not gonna add the sugar. I'm just adding the flour, baking powder, and salt. And I wanna sift this. I'm actually gonna sift it twice. What we're doing is aerating the flour, getting out any lumps, and this will give the scone the flaky, tender texture that we're looking for as well. Just like I said with grating the butter, and we're doing a cut-in butter method to make these. By also sifting the flour twice, it's going to help make it aerated, and then that will help make the texture of the scone flaky and tender at the end. So this is going to take me a while. I'm going to do it twice, and then I can start doing the cut-in butter and show you that as well. So this is how we just crank it. If you don't have one of these, you can just use a strainer or a sieve like this, okay? Put the flour in here, like that. It'll take care of straining the flour as well. It's called sifting the flour. All right, so let me get that done. I'll show you the next step soon. Thank you, bye. All right, so here's our orange zest. I used the microplane zester to get the zest of the oranges. All right, and you don't want to go below and get that white pith. That's bitter. Now these were just 3 mandarin oranges I have for lunch. The navel oranges at Q-Food were very expensive, so I just used these, and it's perfectly fine to use these instead. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix it in with our sugar, so that way it's going to flavor up the sugar. And the best thing to do is that while you're stirring into the sugar, you see how there's lumps of that zest? Well, you don't really want a lump of zest in your scone, all right? You really want to separate it. So I have found over the years the best way to separate the zest when I'm making scones is to put it in with the sugar and stir it around until it's broken up, all right? So we're making this recipe by hand. I'm not doing it in the mixer. If I was making a recipe in the mixer, I could put this in and stir it around. Sometimes I just even use the good old tools, your hand, fingers. I use the very technical term, smushing. So I'm smushing the zest into the sugar. And what ends up happening is you get this beautiful orange colored sugar, lots of flavor, and this will be fantastic. That large amount of zest is going to permeate throughout the whole entire recipe and matches very, very well with our dates, which I already rehydrated and chopped, and we'll add those in at the end. All right, so I'm going to continue doing that until I get every little clump of zest broken up and mixed into the sugar. So that might take a couple of minutes, so I'll come back in a second. I have finished sifting all the flour twice. Baking powder and salt as well are in there. And then I have our 1/2 cup of cream measured, our 1 cup of milk, and then I have mixed in the orange zest to our sugar. Here is our butter. We're getting ready to start making it. We've got the 3 eggs, which I will crack and add to the milk and whisk together before we do that. And showing you all these different steps, but I have to pause to do the work. So I have the sugar, orange zest, flour mixed in. Here's our frozen grated butter. It is frozen solid, so it's a big one lump. I'm gonna let it sit for a second to warm up a bit. Here are 3 eggs. I've mixed the cream and the milk together, and now I'm just gonna break up these yolks. Just stir it together with a fork. And then I can add it to the milk. Pour that in. And then just using the fork again, mix that together. And that is our liquid ingredients. And we'll add that in after we cut in the butter. Now, this method called cut-in butter method, that's what we're using for this recipe, scones. We usually use this. Cutting in the butter leaves our scones flaky and tender and give it that wonderful texture. All right, so what we do to get that is this is called a pastry blender, all right? And it's like having 5 knives to cut the butter in. So if you don't actually have one of these, you can just take 2 butter knives and crisscross it in the bowl, back and forth, cutting the butter in. So now you see what I'm doing is I'm using the pastry blender. I'm cutting the butter into the flour. All right, and since it's grated, it makes it a lot easier instead of big giant hunks of butter, which would require more effort. So, all right, so what I do is I rock down back and forth, and I'm cutting the butter into the flour. Then we stir it up, and we continue doing this, rocking back and forth into the flour. Now this step is going to take a while. It doesn't come instantly. You have to put a little elbow grease into it and do some work. So, I mean, we've got a little mini workout here. You got to get this mixed in. If for any reason you don't have the pastry blender but have a stand mixer, like this, a stand mixer, you could do it in the mixing bowl. You'd use the paddle attachment. You could put it in there and let it do the work for you. The texture of the scone will not be as delightful and wonderful as if you do it by hand, because the machine is going to overwork the gluten in the flour, and that gluten will develop, and like it does for bread, it's going to make the end result a little bit tougher. Now, truthfully, that is a minuscule difference, but the type of thing I can taste. So for me, I'd rather do it by hand and have it completely perfectly the way I want it. But if you don't have the time, don't have a pastry blender, and would just rather do it in the KitchenAid mixer, go right ahead. It's okay. Just don't overmix it. So the minute it comes together, stop the machine, okay? So this is gonna take a while. I'll pause and come back.